All right, so for this video, I'm going to talk about one of the biggest sort of signs or symptoms of an NPC that I've noticed personally, which is that I've noticed that like NPCs or midwits, right? They don't understand things more than the sum of their parts, right? In other words, they don't understand a gestalt, right? If you don't know what gestalt is, it's GESTALT. I believe I believe that's the spelling. If you want to look it up, but basically, gestalt theory deals with understanding systems, understanding things to be more than the sum of their parts, right? And this is a huge revelation to me because this is the biggest this is sort of the easiest way to differentiate a midwit and someone with a soul, right? It doesn't matter if they're smart or they're stupid, right? You can have stupid people who are extremely intuitive, right? And then you can have people who are smart enough to realize being smart doesn't matter. They're smart enough to come back around to being like, oh, okay, the soul's real, right? Consciousness is not just a bunch of electrical impulses, right? But what happens, right, is that the midwit or the NPC, they don't understand things more than the sum of their parts. And one of the things that they will do is that what they'll do is they'll argue the technicalities of what you are saying instead of like they're more concerned about being technically correct than being correct in spirit. And if you don't know what being correct in spirit means, then I don't know. I mean, like being correct in spirit, being correct on like the general message that's being transmitted. And if you're someone that's like, well, what do you mean by being correct in spirit? Then I'm sorry to break it to you, but you might be a midwit, you might be an NPC, because yet again, Gestalt theory. What is it? It's understanding things more than the sum of their parts. And this is something that, like, whenever you try to argue with an NPC, what they'll do is that they'll nitpick the definitions of your words, they'll nitpick the technicalities of what you're saying instead of understanding the general picture that you're trying to paint, right? And this leads into conspiracy theory, right? This leads into, if you try to talk about conspiracy theories, if you give like basic data points, if you say, okay, Larry Silverstein called out of work just right on 9/11, he shorted airline stock on the days before leading up to 9/11. He shorted airline stock just before then, and he wasn't at the Twin Towers when they collapsed or whatever, right? People like the midwit will say, well, what does that have to do with anything, right? And this tendency to not understand things more than the sum of their parts. Yet again, it's like you can explain esoteric spiritual concepts, or not esoteric. I don't like that word, but you can explain like spiritual concepts. You can explain gut feeling. You can explain intuition. You can explain yeah, you can explain like the existence of the soul. You can talk about the nature of consciousness, right? But they won't understand it past a certain point because they don't understand things more than the sum of their parts. And this is where you get into the whole correlation doesn't equal causation. That's a midwit battle cry, right? Is that, well, it's just a coincidence, right? That they're the opposite of a conspiracy theorist. Everything's a coincidence because they don't understand that they don't have like their basic pattern recognition faculties are shot, right? Their basic pattern recognition faculties are shot. Their ability to connect the dots, like what a midwit does, or what an NPC does, is they see the dots, but they don't connect them in their own head, right? The midwit sees dots, but it's either you have to spoon feed the connections to them, or they just don't understand the connection at all, right? Yet again, you can provide like the basic data points for like why do you think a conspiracy theory is true? You can provide the data points, you can paint a general picture, but they'll say, well, what does that have to do with anything? It's just a coincidence. Correlation doesn't equal causation, right? They'll say these things because I think that this is a huge differentiator between people with a soul and people without a soul, or people who are so programmed by academia, by the mainstream media, by the world to not understand, to not have pattern recognition, right? And this is also leading into, like, if you want to talk about like the consciousness, for example, one of the things that a midwit will do is they'll say, well, if you really think about it, our thoughts are just electrical impulses in the brain, and it's just chemicals, and we're all stardust, and we evolved from and like we evolved from apes, and like a fish crawled out of the water from the primordial soup, and everything's just a random event. The Big Bang, everything exploded out of nothing randomly. Life is a random event. Everything just randomly coalesced so things could evolve out of the primordial soup or whatever, right? And this is also like related to materialism. Yet again, like the midwit's inability to understand things more than the sum of their parts, right? Yet again, where it's reducing everything in the universe to its component parts, reducing consciousness to just a computation. Oh, hey, dude, once we connect with AI, we're gonna be gods, dude. We'll be able to listen to Joe Rogan, and I'll be able to do a gorillion operations per second if I just get the Chat GPT brain chip, right? That's sort of the god of materialism, is artificial intelligence, right? Because it's reducing consciousness and the soul inhabiting a human body, right? The spirit inhabiting a human body, and all of the intuitive faculties that come with it, all the free will, all the thoughts, all of the the spiritually originated thoughts that come with it. It's reducing that down to, oh well, it's just a computer, right? And this is another sort of midwit obsession that I see, is the obsession with deconstructing things. You see this in media a lot. You see this whenever the midwit will deconstruct certain concepts, or they'll deconstruct certain things, and they'll sort of satirize it, because isn't it funny that this spiritual concept or this thing is just and like they'll disassemble it into its component parts, and they'll be like, well, yeah, I'm pretty smart, right? They'll disassemble things into their component parts, and they'll say, well, that's all there is to it, right? Everything's just chemicals, right? Everything's just chemicals, and nothing means anything, and it's all just physical processes, right? And when it comes to like the whole obsession with deconstructing things, this is like another. I feel like this is a symptom of the lack of a creative imagination. Is that the midwit will, because of the fact that they don't have a creative imagination, their version of creating things is destroying pre-existing things, is yet again deconstructing pre-existing things. That is their version of their um, sort of way of fulfilling the creative impulse, is to deconstruct or to destroy pre-existing stuff, to desecrate pre-existing stuff. It's the most demonic impulse there is, right? um but yeah, I don't know why I feel compelled to make this kind of video, but that is a symptom that I see of people who are NPCs, people who are midwits, is that they don't understand things more than the sum of their parts. They lack pattern recognition. They lack the ability to connect the dots themselves. Anytime you talk about like a conspiracy theory of any kind, if you try to like connect dots to each other, if you try to paint a general picture for why evil people run the world, like why there are certain groups that are related to each other, and there seems to be a pattern in the media, there seems to be a pattern in the way political events are staged, in order to elicit a response from the masses. If you talk about these things, they'll say, well, what does that have to do with anything? If you try to connect if you try to connect disparate topics, if you try to connect like different like the for example, like the banking system, the school system, like how is how does the school system related to like the mind control, like how is the school system a mind control facility, right? Like the connections between the school system and the prison system, for example, right? Like if you look at like the symbolism and symbolism in the movies, if you look at how that there are certain families that run the banking system, that run big pharma, that you run certain that there are certain groups of people, right? The tiny hats that run certain institutions in our society. And if you try to connect all those dots together, if you try to connect the dots of how the system works together into one sort of big picture, yet again the gestalt, right? The thing that you're trying to describe, that you're trying to transmit to the other person, as more than the sum of its parts. Anytime you try to do this, they'll say, well, what does that have to do with anything? It's just a coincidence, right? Correlation doesn't equal causation, right? Yet again, classic midwit battle cry, correlation doesn't mean causation. Well, I would say that there's always a causation. Anytime that everything's connected, right? But yeah, and it's something that really like drives me up the wall. Like whenever I'm trying to explain something to a person, or whenever I'm trying to connect dots as to how something works to someone, and they'll say, well, what does that have to do with anything, right? Or like what they'll do. Another thing that they'll do, right, is if you're trying to like debate someone, one of the things that they'll do is they'll nitpick like the definitions of your words. Yet again, it's the desire to be technically correct, instead of understanding the general truth that you're trying to transmit, the general message that you're trying to relay to the other person. They'll nitpick the definitions of your words. Like, what do you mean by this word? What do you mean by that word? What do you mean by that? Well, elaborate further. Instead of understanding that there are certain, and language is a very limited, tool for explaining certain concepts. Like, think about, yet again, like gut feeling and intuition. You can there really is no book you can read to understand what gut feeling is, right? Well, I didn't really like the vibes of this person, right? You only understand it if you've experienced it yourself. Like, oh, I don't really feel like the vibes of this person are really weird. I don't feel like I trust this person on a subconscious level, right? If you try to explain a concept like that, where it's like you can't explain it as a mere sum of its parts, you can't explain something like gut feeling or intuition or consciousness. Like yet again, it's like I know for a fact, just by me being conscious, that it's not just chemical process and electrical processes in the brain, right? That there is a soul, that there is, that mind can exist apart from the body, that it exists apart from, material processes, right? And that, this idea of like, oh well, there is no free will because everything's a computer, everything's just math, everything's just a predetermined, computer program, right? Understanding that free will is real, right? Understanding all these things, like it goes way over the midwit's head, because like they won't understand what you're saying beyond the literal component parts of what you're saying, beyond the literal words that you're saying, right? And yet again, like this is like how people will debunk certain things, like the people who like debunk conspiracy theories, like they'll argue. It's also like the thing about conspiracy theories is that the conspirators, like the government, or big corporations, or like the cabal or whatever, right? Is that there's always plausible deniability that they have, right? And so what they'll do is that they'll argue the technicalities of what a person is saying, instead of understanding that, oh, okay, is it a coincidence that, that, like Stanley Meyer, for example, the guy who invented a water powered car, is it a coincidence that he dies of a heart attack, right? Is it a coincidence that people who invent, fusion devices, they fall out of third-story windows, right? Is it a coincidence that that people who get too close to the truth mysteriously die under mysterious circumstances? And um, yet again, like the midwit will argue the technicalities. Well, it might have been a coincidence. Well, that doesn't mean that it happened that way. It doesn't mean that there's a magical conspiracy to control the world, right? Because yet again, that they don't understand gestalt. They don't understand things more than the sum of their parts, and that is just a huge revelation to me. It's a huge tell of whether or not someone has a soul, whether or not someone is a midwit, is if they can this person understand things to be more than the sum of their parts? Or is this person obsessed with deconstructing? Is this person obsessed with reducing everything in the universe down to its component parts? Are they obsessed with, everything's just math, and everything's just, chemicals, everything's just atoms and quarks and leptons and gluons, or whatever, right? And that is the essence of materialism, right? Like the modern sort of religion, the modern sort of scientism, right, is based on materialism, and materialism is the opposite of gestalt. It's the opposite of spirit. It's the attack on the soul of humanity, which is saying that, well, everything's just the sum of its parts. Everything's just chemicals. Nothing means anything. It's all just a predetermined physical process, right? And of course, the god of materialism is AI, and this is another connection that I see, which is, like the worship of AI. That this idea that AI is almost like the materialists' God. It's the materialist savior. ChatGPT is sort of like the messiah of the materialists. It's their version of enlightenment is hooking up to AI, because they see consciousness as a computation. They don't understand that consciousness is more than the sum of its parts. It's more than just biochemical processes in the brain, right? But yeah, I mean, that's just a really big tell of, an NPC, of a midwit, is their inability to understand things more than the sum of their parts, right? But yeah, that's the video.